Okay, now we're ready to start. So good morning to everyone. Thank you for coming out this morning. Even though normally it's a day off and we're more relaxed, it is Friday and Erev Shabbos on a short Shabbos. So Yasher Koach that you took the time to come out and engage in some learning. So we all know before we go to bed at night, we part of the Kriyat Shema Al Hamita, we say a pasuk B'Shem Hashem Elokei Yisrael, and then we say the names of the Malachim who are watching over us. And one of them is Mimini Michael. Right on the right hand, the angel Michael is watching over us. Who is this angel Michael? So he comes up several times in the book of Daniel from the works of Ketuvim, and he's mentioned there as the chief prince of Israel. And midrashically, we have a whole litany of events where Michael comes up to be the savior of individuals or of the Jewish people. In one case, when Abraham, we know the famous story of Abraham being pulled out of the fiery furnace, we're told that was the angel Michael who protected him within those flames. When Sarah was abducted and held under the Pharaoh, it was Michael who protected her during the night so that Pharaoh wasn't able to cause any harm to her. Michael was the angel, we're told, who told Sarah, gave her the news that she was going to have a son. He was the one who continued on to the city of Sodom and rescued Lot. And he was the angel, according again to Midrashic tradition, who stopped the Akedah and prevented Abraham from killing his son Yitzchak. There are other stories as well that talk about Michael, but these are some of the big ones. These are some of the famous ones that we know of. And he just, because of these stories, he became known as the advocate and protector of the Jewish people. We know the famous Ari, the Kabbalist, gave us a notion that when a parent gives their child a name, they are blessed with a moment of Ruach HaKodesh, right? A moment of prophecy of, describing who that child is going to be and encapsulating that in the name they give them. And if we don't want to think Kabbalistically, we just want to think rationally, the Talmud also introduces us to a concept that says, Kishmo, Kain Hu. Just as the name of the person, that is who they are. The famous example is a negative one of the Naval. Naval, from the story of David HaMelech, was the man who refused to give him provisions, and David wanted to put him to death, and it was only the savior, Abigail, Naval's wife, that interceded and prevented David from killing him. But the name Naval means despicable. It means disgusting. And that's what it said about him, Kishmo Kain Hu. His name describes who he was. It describes his essence. So we have an unlikely example to personify these ideas of somebody having Ruach HaKodesh when they're naming their child, and the name being indicative of what the person is or who they're going to become, with the famous Michelangelo. Because what does Michelangelo mean? The angel, Michael. And what does the word Michael mean in Hebrew? Mikael, who is like God, right? So Michelangelo, in some way, shape, or form, as we're going to explore some of these ideas, was really a protector of the Jewish people and of Jewish values and of Jewish concepts. All of these ideas are coming from a book, maybe some of you have read it before, written by Rabbi Benjamin Bleich, who is a famous teacher from Yeshiva University and lecturer, and he co-authored with a man by the name of Roy Doliner. Roy Doliner is, as far as I know, the only Orthodox Jewish tour guide at the Vatican, and he's also a scholar as well. When Rabbi Bleich had the opportunity to meet this Roy Doliner, and he took him on the tour through the Vatican and showed him some of the secrets that were hidden in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, they collaborated and they wrote this book together. So let's go back in time. How did it come to be known as the Vatican? Where does that word come from? It is not Latin or Greek. The etymology does not come from there. It actually originates earlier from the Etruscan language, which was the pagan civilization upon which Roman civilization was built. So there are certain suggestions of what the word Vatican means. One possibility, it was from Vatica, and she was the goddess that watched over this hillside where the Vatican was ultimately built. That's where they had their burial grounds, and this goddess was the one who watched over the bodies. Another possibility, kind of make us smile a little bit, was that it was the name of a weed that grew on the mountain, on the hillside. And again, when we call it weed, I mean to imply something by that, that when people would chew it, it would cause some hallucinations in them. And ultimately, when the word transformed into Latin, it came to mean prophetic visions. And we know we always have this description of the prophets being in somewhat of a trance or a dreamlike state when they would give over their prophecies. Many years later, St. Peter was executed on that hillside, and ultimately people would start to make a pilgrimage to the site of his death. And the popes and the leaders tried to capitalize on the attraction of that location, and they ended up building a shrine there. And then again, it evolved from a shrine to a palace. That was the location. Today, just show of hands, anyone here has been to the Vatican? Because I've never been, so I'm speaking just by what I've read, but some of you can corroborate what I'm saying. So today it's the world's smallest country, and it could fit 8 times over into Central Park. Right? That's how small it is. It's the home of the spiritual leadership to 1/5 of the world's population, and it is the home of the world's largest church, palace, and museum. Right? So interesting, again, that we're going to find a lot of Jewish symbols in a very unlikely location. Okay. The first effort to beautify this area, this chapel, this palace that was built on this hillside, was done by Pope Sixtus. Pope Sixtus was a very intelligent person, very driven man, but unfortunately for him came from a very poor family and lacked a lot of opportunities. So the best way he saw himself being able to acquire power and wealth and recognition was by becoming a priest. That was the door that was open to him. He became a cardinal in the year 1467, and he became the Pope, Pope Sixtus IV, in the year 1471. His first act, once being in a position of power like that, was to acquire wealth and honor for his family. So it's interesting, the evolution of what he did. He used his nephews to do the dirty work. He would appoint them into positions of cardinals. He would marry them off into wealthy families using his name and position as an attraction. And the medieval Italian word for nephew is nepote. Hence the word nepotism. Exactly, that's where it comes from. Okay, one of his main focuses as Pope, despite the external and internal threats that Rome faced during his time, was to revive the splendor of Rome. Very consistent with, again, building up his glory and his reputation. So he started to rebuild churches and bridges and libraries and acquire art collections. And one of his projects, his biggest project, was renovating the Palatine Chapel, which ultimately is going to become the Sistine Chapel. Ironically, it was done in the year 1475, which is the same year that Michelangelo was born. So it started to become a significant place of art even before Michelangelo was born. He hired a young architect by the name of Pontelli, came from the city of Florence, and this man's specialty was construction and reinforcement. Now, interesting, there's a Gemara in Megillah Daf 10a, and it forbids the building of a full-size replica of the Beis HaMikdash. No one is allowed to do that. So if you've ever been, it used to be the Holy Land Hotel, now they moved it to the Israel Museum, right? That's a miniature replica of the Beis HaMikdash in Jerusalem. That's not a problem. But to recreate a full-size replica of the Beis HaMikdash outside of Jerusalem, that the Talmud tells us is forbidden. Interestingly enough, when they remodeled this Palatine Chapel, they built it exactly to the measurements that are found in the Book of Melachim when Shlomo built the Beis HaMikdash. It is an exact replica in size and in layout of the Beis HaMikdash. And you'll see it. We have one picture up here. I apologize, maybe the quality isn't so good. But there's 2 sections to it. There's the smaller section, which was the western half, which was the Pope's private area, and it's 6 inches higher than the eastern half, the lower down part, which was the area for the common people. Again, very reminiscent of the Kodesh Kodashim and the general area. And you can see the partition that separated was supposed to be reminiscent of the Parochet that separated the 2 places. Why was it designed that way? Why did they want it to look just like the Beis HaMikdash? Because it's too similar to be a coincidence. So there are suggestions, no one really knows. Perhaps it was the Pope's idea. Perhaps he wanted to show that Christianity and Catholicism was replacing Judaism, right? It was, you had your temple at one point, but now we're taking it over. Or perhaps it was Pontelli's idea. He was from the liberal city of Florence. We're going to talk about that more in a minute. And they had an influential population of Jews. It wasn't unusual to have Jewish symbols in art at the time. And perhaps he's the one who had the idea to make it look this way. Okay, also the original ceiling. Now, this picture is a more recent picture with the painted works of Michelangelo, but the original ceiling of the Palatine Chapel was actually covered with stars like the night sky, almost as if you were in an aquarium. Not an aquarium. That's what I'm looking for? Planetarium, thank you. Okay, so it's covered with stars like the night sky, and I want to suggest it was reminiscent. Is that coming back on? There we go. Reminiscent of the dream of Yaakov when he looked up at the sky. And where did that dream take place? In a place that we refer to as Beit El, right? That he woke up and he said, this is the house of God. That again, tradition tells us was the location where the Beit HaMikdash was ultimately going to be built. Was that coincidence that they designed it to look that way? Probably not. Okay. After getting the layout and the construction done, he wanted to beautify it. And he hired these artists from the city of Florence to paint the frescoes that were going on the walls. He wasn't interested in the ceiling yet. The ceiling was just the stars, but at this point in time, he was interested in beautifying the walls. So to understand these frescoes a little bit, we have to back up and talk about the city of Florence. So anyone here been to Florence? Right, okay, that I've done. That I've done. It was ruled by the Medici family at the time. Cosimo was the head of the family. And when you read about them, you kind of get the sense that they were like the Kennedys of the city of Florence. They were wealthy, they were respected, and they really wanted to do a lot to build up the city and bring culture to it, bring art, bring wisdom, bring texts. And they brought the Jews into the city of Florence. It wasn't common that Jews were welcomed into places in Europe during that time, but they saw value in bringing the Jews in. It turned out to be a very popular decision on the part of the Medici family, because we know what was the typical profession of Jews at that time. We were the moneylenders. So when we came in as moneylenders, the small people who didn't have access to funds now all of a sudden had access to funds. They could build houses, they could start businesses. It was very popular that the Jews came in. They did nice things for the town. And in addition, that we brought with us our culture, our wisdom, our texts, which was valued by the Medici family and ultimately by the entire city of Florence. Cosimo had a couple of sons, Lorenzo, who was the main heir to the family history, and Giuliano. So the Pope was very threatened by the Medici family and what was going on. He didn't like free thinking. He was jealous of the wealth and of the honor and of the prestige that was coming from there. So he had Giuliano assassinated. He tried to bump off Lorenzo as well, wasn't successful, tried to orchestrate it in a way that would make the people turn against the Medici family, but it didn't work. It backfired, and it only brought them more fame and more popularity. So when the Pope saw that that didn't work, he reached out and tried to make a truce, right? If you can't beat your enemy, then we'll join them. And part of that truce, part of that connection was inviting artists from the city of Florence to come and paint the frescoes on the walls in this Palatine chapel. If there was such animosity, though, between the Medici family and the Pope, even if the Pope was reaching out, why would the Medicis offer to help? Why would they send their artists? What was in it for them to give something and provide something for the Pope? So there are a couple of suggestions. The Pope's goals that he stated when he wanted to paint these frescoes were twofold. Number one, the way they're designed, one side is images from the life of Moshe, and the other side are images from the life of Jesus. And he wanted to basically show how Moses was only a foreshadow to Jesus, and that this is being taped, this probably so good. And he wanted to show how Jesus, that religion took domination over Judaism. That was number one, the supremacy of Christianity over Judaism. And goal number two, and we see it again throughout the paintings on the wall, he wanted to show the supremacy of his own family over any other family, specifically the Medicis. That was who he saw himself in competition with, but really over anyone. They were referred to as the Della Roveris, which means an oak tree. And if you get a good look at some of the pictures, which unfortunately I couldn't find good images to put up here of the frescoes themselves, but they're replete with oak trees and acorns all over the place. So clearly that was one of his goals. He wanted to show the supremacy of his family over all others. So if these were his goals, why would Lorenzo agree to participate in this? So the main suggestion that we have today is sabotage. He agreed to be part of it so that he could undo it in subtle ways but still get his message across. So there are several examples of where we see this. Number one, anyone familiar with the book Where's Waldo? Yeah. Right? So interestingly enough, one of the painters, Rosselli, had a little white puppy that supposedly was there with them while they were doing the painting. Mm-hmm. And if you look closely enough, you can find this little white puppy in every single one of the frescoes that they painted on the wall. Okay, so that's one. I grew up in Memphis. My mother had bought us a book called Where's Elvis? Similar idea, but you had to find Elvis in the book. A second example, Botticelli was one of the painters. He placed an orange tree, which was the symbol of the Medici family, inside the burning bush when he painted the image of Moshe, right? To show again who's the supreme family. It's the Medicis. Again, Botticelli, when he did a scene depicting the rebellion of Korach, he dressed Korach in the colors of the Pope's family. Right? He was the rebel. And in the background, there's some boats. One of the boats that is being wrecked and swallowed up symbolized Rome. And the boat that is floating and standing tall has the flag of Florence flying from it. Okay? And then there was another painter by the name of D'Antonio. He depicted a scene of the parting of the Red Sea. And in that picture, the pharaoh is wearing the colors of the Pope's family. And a building that suspiciously looks like the chapel itself is being washed away in the waters of the Red Sea. Now, what's amazing is that, the Pope never picked up on this, and he officiated at the consecration of the new chapel in the year 1483, and he was blissfully unaware and thrilled with the results and with the quality of the work. Okay, so this is not the first example we have of people coding messages in art. We know it from our own text, right? Yosef. What did Yosef do? When he sent those wagons to pick up his father, he was sending him a message through the wagons. On the one hand, we all know the story, the famous Rashi about the Eglah Rufa, that he was conveying to his father, I remember the last thing that we learned together. I'm still faithful to you. I'm still loyal to the values of our family. But even the fact that he was able to take these wagons that only belonged to royalty in Egypt, and he, apparently the Medrash says, defaced the images on them, the Avodah Zarah images on the side of the wagons, that he had the authority to do that, also was a subtle way of conveying to his father, hinting to his father that he maintained his, that he, not only did he maintain his Judaism, but he was also an authoritative figure in Egypt. He rose in the position of power. And art has always been a way for people to express what they were forbidden to openly express. Okay, let's talk about Michelangelo. How does he enter into the picture? So he was born to a family. His mother died when he was at the age of 6, and his father was told was the unsuccessful son of a successful father, right? That's always a hard thing to live up to, and was trying, I guess, if we could play psychologist, was trying to fix that with his own son, and tried to get his son to learn a trade, to get his son to earn a living, and all Michelangelo wanted to do was paint and sculpt. Mainly he was a sculptor. That was his real craft. And finally, as a young adolescent, he gave up on trying to make him into a money earner, and he brings him to the city of Florence, and he deposits him there in the artist colony. He was 13 years old at the time, and he became an apprentice to, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this name right, Yael, who was also one of the painters of the frescoes of the Sistine Chapel. His work became known. It's hard to ignore a prodigy usually, and his reputation spread. And ultimately, Lorenzo Medici took him in, adopted him as one of his family, and gave him the same tutors, the same educational opportunities that he gave to his own children. And Michelangelo, interestingly, had two main tutors. One was a man by the name of Ficino, and Ficino, none of these men were Jewish, but they seem to, again, have had adopted some Jewish culture and some Jewish wisdom. And he had a very Kabbalistic approach to how he taught. He elevated love and beauty to a spiritual level. So, basically everything was spiritual somehow, even if it was rooted in the physicality. His second primary tutor was a man by the name of Pico della Mirandola. And Pico had one of the largest collections of Kabbalistic works that was known at the time. Again, not a Jewish man, but somebody who valued wisdom and was interested in pursuing all types of wisdom. And he exposed Michelangelo to everything, to Greek culture, Christianity, Judaism. Almost everything he learned was forbidden by the church, but that was something that he was exposed to at a young age.
This is, since this is during the time of the Inquisition, is it possible that the teachers really were Jewish or had been Jewish?
I think this
Jewish blood?
Possibly. I don't know.
In the late 1400s.
Right.
So
right. But I think these men were Italian. They were, their families were Italian.
But the Inquisition was in Italy as well.
True.
But if you see, when you go to the gates in Rome, you see the menorah and the Jews bringing that after Corban Bias I. So there were Jews going back in Italy, I think, all the way from Corban Bias I. So
it's possible.
They were.
It's possible. I'm not a history expert,
The other
but
thing I just wanted to say was this is the time. This is hundreds of years before the unification of Italy, and all of these cities, they were city-states, and the Pope was the king of his city-state, which was the Vatican, Bologna. So maybe there's a lot of power play.
I'm sure there was.
political power play because the Medicis were from the Florence area, which was a different
Correct.
city-state.
I'm sure there were a lot of factors going on at the time. In 45 minutes, we're just trying to stay focused.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. I just, it's good. It's good that you're bringing it up. Okay, another interesting point. This I do have a picture for to show you. I can get it up here. Okay. So this is a scene from the Sistine Chapel, from the ceiling that Michelangelo had painted. It is the creation scene where Adam and Eve are being driven out of the Garden of Eden. So, you recognize
did this in class.
Okay. So what's interesting about this picture, a lot of things are interesting about this picture, but look at the kind of tree that he paints, right? If this was the forbidden fruit tree, in Christian theology, what kind of a fruit was it? It was an apple tree. But you see what this is? This is a fig tree. Why does he paint the original sin, the forbidden fruit tree as a fig tree? Because there is a medrash, there's a Gemara that talks about what kind of a tree was the Eitz Hadat, what did they eat from? And none of the opinions in the Gemara say it was an apple tree. One of the accepted opinions was it was a fig tree because we know that because afterwards they covered themselves up with fig leaves, right? But where did Michelangelo get this knowledge from? Right? We can see that he did have some understanding of Medrash, of Kabbalah. There's a quote of Michelangelo where he said, "Every block of stone has a statue inside it, and the task of the sculptor is to discover it." So he didn't see a block of stone. He saw what was hiding inside. And again, that's such a Kabbalistic notion because the Kabbalah's idea is that every object houses, right, the emanation of God inside of it. So he related to these ideas. This was something that spoke to him as an artist and spoke to his soul. Okay, things started to change up a little bit. For unknown reasons, his tutor, Pico, convinced Lorenzo to bring a fanatical monk by the name of Savonarola into the town of Florence. Perhaps, suggested maybe he brought him in just to show how ridiculous he was, and, it would turn people away. But sometimes you're not supposed to underestimate your enemies. And when he brought him in, he started to win over people. Even with his fanaticism, he was able to make people listen. And then there was a series of events that took place that made people fearful. Apparently, there was a lightning strike on the steeple of the cathedral and shattered it. And not long after that, Lorenzo died of a mysterious illness. So he put all these, little pieces together, and the free thinking in Florence was now coming under threat. And it bothered Michelangelo. He didn't want to be there. It was the same time the Inquisition was happening in Spain, and he left. He left and he went to Rome, and he tried to, protest whatever he could through his work. When he was in Rome, again, the knowledge of his talent spread. He was commissioned by a significant cardinal to create a pieta. So what is a pieta? It's in Hebrew we call it the Rachmanut. It's an image of when Jesus' body is taken off the cross and put into the lap of his mother. So even within that painting, he wasn't allowed to sign his name on it. So hidden in the folds of Mary's skirt is his name. He was able to get his signature in there. And the other, thing that he switched up a little bit was, historically, they say she was around 50 years old at the time of the crucifixion. He painted her as a young girl. And they want to suggest that perhaps he was, taking that midrash that we have about Sarah, that she was, even though she was 127, she was 100, she was 20, she was 7, embodied all the different stages of life, still a young woman. After the downfall of Savonarola, Michelangelo returns to Florence, and it was at that point in time that he creates the famous David statue. That's when he does that. And again, that was really his main craft, was the sculpting. Painting was something he did on the side, but he didn't consider himself a painter. He considered himself a sculptor. The new pope, Julius II, who was the nephew of the original Sixtus that we spoke about, calls him back to Rome because he is embarking on a major project to repair the Sistine Chapel. The foundation was off somehow, and if the foundation is off, everything cracks. This happened to our house when I was growing up. There was a lot of water, damage, and we had cracks all over the house. A big job to repair it. So once he was taking on this big job to repair it, he figured he could beautify it as well, and he wanted to commission Michelangelo to do the paintings on the ceiling. He was very reluctant to take this position on. Number one, it was 12,000 square feet. For someone who doesn't see himself as a painter, that's a tremendous canvas to have to cover. Number two, he felt, himself unworthy to compete with the frescoes that were already on the wall. Those are beautiful works of art from people who he looked up to as his mentors. How could his work, be in the same place? He also felt the church was in use all the time. How would he be able to paint when there was constantly traffic coming in and out? Artists need quiet. They need, their environment to be able to be creative. And then, more important philosophically, he had a lot of disagreements with the Pope. And he didn't feel like he would have the artistic freedom to paint what he wanted to paint. Unfortunately for him, being commissioned by the Pope is not optional. Right? He was asked to do it. He wasn't given the choice to say no. So he came up with a way. Somehow he was able to convince the Pope to allow him to bring in his own type of scaffolding. So he created a type of arch that would allow him access to the ceiling that had a big drop cloth underneath. Right? He said, I don't want the paint to ruin the floor, to ruin the seats. But really, what he was doing was ensuring himself privacy while he was working. Everyone would look up, they wouldn't see what he was doing until he was done. Right? And then it was too late to undo it. I guess never too late, but yeah, it couldn't be undone. Also, he convinced the Pope that he needed his own team. That, he had his people who he worked with, his assistants, people who understood him, who could work with him, and that was really, that it ensured him that he didn't have any spies working with him, and he felt that way he could get the freedom that he needed. Okay. It took him 4.5 years to finish this project. He could not wait for it to be finished. It was very difficult on him. He did not paint the whole thing lying down, as the legend goes, but the positions that he was in, the contortions of his body, it caused a lot of long-term health problems. He suffered vision problems, respiratory problems, scoliosis, rheumatism, and some even suggest he had a problem with water retention and kidney stones. Anyone who's ever had that knows that's not fun. So it was really, it really took its toll on him to be able to carry out that project. What is amazing about what he did on the ceiling is that there is barely one Christian figure in more than 300 images that he painted on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. There's no Jesus or Mary anywhere. In the front of the Sistine Chapel, 22 years later, he was called back to paint the Last Judgment scene. But the initial painting, it's all figures from the Old Testament, or what we call Tanakh. Today we get 4 million people a year go to see it. And when you walk in, what I've been told is your feeling is overwhelming. There's so much to look at. And the suggestion of the authors of this book is they did that intentionally. Because when you have a lot to look at, you can't look at specific details. And that was their method of being able to hide the messages that he wanted to hide and convey. So let's give some examples of some of the things that he painted here. Here we go. Okay. From the way he intended it to work, where you walked in, this was going to be the first thing that you see. Anyone know who this is supposed to be? I mean, you can't tell from this picture. The prophet Zechariah. Zechariah the prophet, okay? Now, why would he choose Zechariah the prophet as the first one you see when you walk in? Even by our standards, he's a minor prophet. The only time we even really know about Zechariah is because we read a Haftorah from him on Hanukkah. But otherwise, he's not the first one that comes to mind. So why Zechariah? So here's some suggestions. Number one is that one of the themes of the book of Zechariah was warnings against a corrupt priesthood. Warnings against a corrupt priesthood. We know in our day we had corruption of the Kohanim, but here, right, maybe that's the message he wanted to convey. A veiled message about the hypocrisy of the Pope and the religious leaders at the time. Zechariah also prophesies about redemption. All the Nevi'im prophesize about redemption. But maybe the fact that he is the first figure you see in a place that is the replica of the temple, right, maybe he's trying to convey the point that it's only a replica. Ultimately, there's going to be a redemption, and the temple will be rebuilt in its own place, in a foreign land for Rome. And then again, the famous message from Zechariah that we read on Hanukkah is that of the menorah. What kind of a symbol, at least in Michelangelo's opinion, was the menorah? It's 7 branches from one piece of gold. It's a unifying symbol. And he wanted to convey that many branches can come together to convey light. We don't have to suggest that there's only one way to spread light into the world. Now, what's interesting is obviously there were no photographs of Zechariah, right? So how did he know what he looked like? This actually was the face of the Pope. And that's how come the Pope didn't protest. He looked at it, he saw himself first thing when he walked in. Right away, he felt very kindly towards the works of Michelangelo and didn't scrutinize very much. Okay, the one thing that I want to point out, though, which is interesting, if you see this, there's two little boys or cherubim, angels, standing behind him. And this one, he's got his fingers like this. So I apologize if anyone comes from a society where you know what this means, because it's really not a very nice gesture. This, in their time, was the equivalent of what we would call giving the finger. And that's the image. You can see it. It's a little dark. It's a little blurry. It's not so clear. But that is the suggestion of how he painted it. If that's the face of the Pope, there's somebody expressing their feelings that way. Yeah.
How do we know it's Zachariah?
Oh, there's a sign underneath it. I don't think it came in this picture, but there are signs under them that say what they are. Some of the pictures might have it, depending on where I got it from, which website. Okay, another image that we have right here. This one doesn't have the sign either, but he does indicate who it was. This is supposed to be Aminadav. Again, not a major character that, as Jews who study texts, would really come to mind. We really know Aminadav from his son, Nachshon ben Aminadav, right? Nachshon was the one who jumped into the waters to display his faith that God was going to ultimately save the Jewish people. But what does the name Aminadav mean? A prince of my people. A prince of my people. Now, the interesting thing about Aminadav here, if you notice, this apparently was just discovered recently when they were doing a cleaning of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. What does he have on his arm there? A yellow band. A yellow band. So we associate a marking of yellow on our clothing with Nazi Germany, right? When the Jews had to wear the yellow stars. But apparently Hitler was not the first one to mark with yellow. That even back in Europe, they used yellow. Why yellow? Because it was the color of urine. It was degrading. It was a sign that you're disgusting and you're despicable. They made prostitutes wear it as well. And so here, what did Michelangelo do? He painted Aminadav, the prince of my people, right? From the Pope's perspective, there's only one prince that came from the Jewish people, right? And look now, he's sending the message. Look how you're treating the his fellow compatriots. You're treating them as second-class citizens. You're treating them as lower, with hatred and with persecution. Okay, another example we have here. Oh, sorry, one more thing. And you see this portrait of Aminadav is actually in the spot right over where the Pope would sit. And the suggestion here is you see his two fingers are pointing downwards. That's supposed to be devil's horns. Like the bunny ears in the picture? Doing devil's horns over the head of the Pope. Okay. I'm not making this up, I promise. Okay, the next, these are the corners of the ceiling. So obviously 4 corners in a ceiling. These are the 4 panels. So the first one here, I'm going to draw your attention to this scene here, right? This is the famous medical symbol. Where does that come from? That's the Nachash HaNechoshet, right? When the Jewish people were complaining and the fiery snakes were killing them, Moshe built this copper snake and held it on a staff, and anyone who looked at it would be saved. So Michelangelo depicts that scene. The second scene here, this is supposed to be the story of Judith by Hanukkah time, Yehudit, right, where she executes the Greek general. The third corner, this is the story of David and Goliath. And the fourth corner is the story of Haman's downfall. Okay? Why? I mean, this seems so random that these are the 4 images in the corner. Is there any connection to them? So again, the book suggests that there is a midrash on a pasuk that we are all very familiar with. We say it in Sefer Devarim. It's part of the text of the Bikurim, but we're more familiar with it because we say it in the text of our Seder every Pesach. V'yotzianu Hashem miMitzrayim, b'yad chazakah, u'vizroa nituya, u'v'morah gadol, u'v'otot u'moftim. And the Midrash says each of those phrases is referring to each of those stories. Right? So again, coincidence? I think not. Oh, thank you. There we go. See, it really is my favorite line. Okay, no, it's something that came up in class. Okay, another example here. Oh, so here's one with the name. This is Jeremiah the prophet, Yirmiyahu. Okay? What do we see about Yirmiyahu? So it's going to be hard to see, but he's holding a scroll down here, and I don't know, does this make it bigger? Can you make things bigger on a smartboard? I don't know. But on the scroll, it says here Aleph, and then it says Ayin. Aleph and Ayin on the scroll. Again, very small. Obviously, if you're standing on the floor looking up at the ceiling with all those symbols, you're not going to see it. But the Aleph and the Ayin. What is significant about an Aleph and an Ayin? So on the one hand, there is a halacha that if a Kohen Gadol cannot distinguish between the pronunciation of an Aleph and an Ayin, then he's not fit for his job. Right? So perhaps the message that Michelangelo was trying to convey is the Pope is not fit for his job. Exactly, that's one thing. The other idea is, what is the gematria of Aleph? Is 1, and Ayin
70.
is 70, exactly. All right, what is there 70 of? What is 70 reminiscent of? 70 nations of the, 70 nations of the world, exactly. And again, there you could be 1 or 70, right? His Michelangelo's theme was, we don't have to be exclusive. There's room for everyone. It's similar to the menorah idea, that it's 7 branches, but all coming from one piece of gold. There's no one right way to do things. Okay, and then finally,
I don't think it's the beginning of Eicha. I mean, Aleph being Eicha.
could be, but then the Ayin, what is the Ayin doing there? Right. And it says Aleph, like it doesn't say Eicha, it says Aleph. So, and it's spelled out.
The 70 family members that went down to Egypt.
That could be too.
So
That could be
it's
too.
like the Jews were right.
Yeah. Possibly. Although when we were going down, we were going to be enslaved, so that's not necessarily our finest moment. Okay, and then as you exit, this is going to be the last example I'm going to give. As you exit, the way Michelangelo had intended one to go through was this figure. Can anyone guess who it is? Jonah, right, because you see the fish.
Right.
And again, he didn't make a whale, he made a fish, right, which is, again, very consistent with the text that he had. Why was his final figure Jonah? Like, as you leave, what was he thinking? Why was, again, because to us, somewhat of a minor figure. He becomes very popular Yom Kippur, but otherwise we don't really spend too much time or attention on Jonah. So think about what Jonah's life represented. He was a man who was forced into a mission he didn't want to do. Right? Exactly. Right? And what was that mission that he didn't want to do? His job was to advise a Gentile nation to repent. And again, perhaps maybe that's what Michelangelo was doing, the same thing, advising a Gentile nation that it needs to repent. He being part of that nation, but the leadership of that nation. Okay, so I mean, there are many other examples. There are many other paintings and symbols on the ceiling. These are just some of the few that I chose to share with you today. The question I want to really conclude with is this real? Again, I'm saying it as someone who read the book. The authors of the book are saying it as people who are historians and who have more extensive knowledge. But if you would ask the church, obviously they would say, there are many other ways to interpret these symbols, and they would say this is probably very heretical, let alone not accurate. But it's debated. It's debated by scholars. There's a man by the name of Enrico Bruscini, who is a respected art historian in Rome today. He actually is the one who wrote the introduction to this book. And he says that these ideas that are presented in the book of what we've now discovered in the minutiae of the paintings will change the way we view and understand Michelangelo. So not necessarily endorsing it 100%, but definitely saying there's room to consider this. It's not so far out of left field. And Rabbi Blech himself, who wrote the book, has an interesting spin on it, on how he sees the certification on Michelangelo. Because that after he died, he was buried in Rome, and the people of Florence, who considered him their son, right, their prodigal son, they didn't want to see his body buried in Rome, and they actually exhumed his body and stole it and brought it back to Florence. And when they wanted to build an appropriate shrine as a memorial for his burial place, they contracted a Jewish architect to come and to build the shrine. They had to negotiate because the architect wanted credit for his work, and there was no way they were going to put the name of a Jew on the building of a church. That just wasn't going to happen. So they came to a conclusion, an agreement, that they would put a Jewish star. They would put a Jewish star over it. So to this day, the burial place of Michelangelo has a Jewish star over his grave. Rabbi Blech wants to suggest that maybe that's that's his OU. That's his hashgacha. That he did a good job taking care of the Jewish people. Definitely food for thought. I think appropriate food for thought on today. Not that we're going to be, I didn't lecture in Hebrew, so I apologize. But, I highly recommend if you're interested in further ideas to get the book. It's really fascinating, a very fascinating read. The name of the book is, one second, I wrote it down here. It's called The Sistine Secrets, Michelangelo's Forbidden Messages in the Heart of the Vatican. Yeah.
Do you happen to know prior to this book if anything of this sort was published, either in medieval times or just a couple hundred years ago? I imagine that must be hard to do for some period when the Sistine Chapel was all covered with grime. So
Right. A lot of this was revealed after it had been cleaned. Exactly.
I'm just wondering if there's any other earlier.
Right.
There wasn't a lot of, there wouldn't have been a lot of.
Right, and it would have been a death wish to, explain these things. Had Michelangelo written them down or said this was my intention, he certainly, couldn't have gotten away with it the way that he
Do you know what his
supposedly did.
last name was, Michelangelo?
No, I don't know.
No,
I don't know.
it does happen.
Yes.
It does happen. Accidentally, I brought something which I want to give it to the school, so I wonder, is this maybe in the Vatican?
I don't know. Is that? I don't. Anyone who's been? Does anyone recognize that? It looks like much on Torah, but I don't know if he's got that image in the Vatican. I don't think so. But you could look it up. Anyway, thank you so much. Enjoy the next session, and a good Shabbos to everybody.